Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. It is another Market Down Monday. I'm Nathan Baird from cleveland.com along with Stephen Means and Andrew Gillis. This is your first Market Down Monday. Do you feel the excitement? Do you feel the electricity? Do you feel the pressure? The pressure's on.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a pun on how to start Market Down Monday, and I couldn't think of one, so that's a rough start. But I am excited. I do feel the electricity in the air. I feel the heat of the takes that are already going to happen. So I'm excited. Hopefully this is the first of many extremely good takes that people are going to hear from me.
Stephen, is this the true initiation? Is this where we find out if Andrew can hang?
Yeah, because actually, yes, it is. He's laughing, but it actually is because these are the type of staples that are literally the epitome of Buckeye talk. It's predicting things, it's having some level of fact behind it, but it's also just understanding that you're probably going to be wrong a year from now when we look back on these.
Well, we usually don't wait a year. We like to remember things
That's
people
true.
say on Market Down Monday and to remind them of them every single week during the season, especially if it is not going according to plan. Same as for driving the bus, same as any prediction. You wear them. It's like Flava Flav's clock, except it weighs like 1,000 pounds, and you have to just drag it around throughout the whole season. We've only got 4 or 5 of these to go, by the way. Preseason camp starts Thursday at Ohio State. The first game, that's August 3rd. The first game is September 2nd at Indiana. So you can do the math there. I think we've got this one. I think we've got 4 more. So it's a lot of big topics that we'll be hitting between now and the start of the season. But today, we are talking about Buckeye Grove. We are talking about All-Americans. And this is something that always helps us get a real clear picture of the star power that we think is on the roster. We are predicting who we think gets a tree in Buckeye Grove. Now, it's kind of a modified version of that because I'm limiting us to the 5 major All-American lists. Ohio State goes broader than that. Ohio State, if you make an ESPN list, a CBS list, I think Noah Ruggles made an ESPN list a couple years ago as a first-teamer. That gets him a tree. We're limiting it to the 5 unanimous consensus All-America lists, which are American Football Coaches Association, Football Writers Association, AP, Sporting News, and Walter Camp. And that helps me get a context for some of the things we're about to talk about here. But how much, Stephen, do you look at an exercise like this and having it open your eyes? If you think this team has a lot of first-team All-Americans or you're suspect about how many first-team All-Americans it might have, does that change how you think of the ceiling for any given team?
I think with Ohio State specifically, yes, especially on defense, just because it's a little more free flowing with defense. So if we get to the end of the year and there's like 6 guys where we're like, you can make a case that they deserve to get one, because that's all you need is one of those 5 to give you an All-American, first-team All-American bid, and you get a tree. If you get to the end of the season and there's 6 guys where you feel like that defensively, that means that you think the defense is going to be pretty good. I think offensively, the names are so established at this point in some of these spots that it's a little harder to get larger than maybe 4 or 5. I actually listed out everybody that I think could do it in a perfect world scenario, and I got around like 13 to 15 names. A lot of that was defense, which shocked me at first, but then I remembered that, that's because the offense is pretty easy, because some of those names is just, can they do it again, while also being a bigger name coming into the year already.
First team All-American on this short of a number of lists that's a tough needle to thread. Like, it means something to be a first team All-American on one of those 5 lists. Ohio State has not had a huge abundance of them in recent years, but really they do better than most programs. Obviously, you wouldn't be surprised to hear. I threw a list at you guys. Ohio State had just last season only 2 on these major lists. So that was Marvin Harrison Jr. being a unanimous pick, Paris Johnson Jr. But since 2014, and I like to use that, the playoff era as like an easy shorthand. And now this season, it kind of rounds out a very easy decade for us to look back on. They've had 4 seasons where they've had at least 4 All-American, 4 first-team All-Americans on one of those 5 major lists. 2018 was the only year that they had none. So pretty consistently, 4, 3, 2. 2018 they had 0. 2014 the only one was Joey Bosa, and he was a unanimous pick. But it's a pretty consistent small group that you get every year. But it's really not that small when you think about how few players are up for that sort of award. But there's one position that is glaringly absent from the list that I sent you guys, and glaringly absent from Ohio State's All-America list going back now a while. Andrew, how long would you think it's been? I don't know what sort of research you did, so I'm asking you because you're the most blind on this. just guessing off of reputation. How long since Ohio State has had a first-team All-American quarterback?
Oh boy. Oh man.
On one of these major lists, but I think it's actually the first time they've had any first-team All-America quarterback, not just the 5 major lists.
So wow, I did not research this. So this is a good question. Good job.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. Thank you.
Man, I don't know. I'm trying to think of names. I'm going back to like Joe Germain. Like, I don't know if it's got to be somewhere. I'll say the 90s, whenever Germain played.
So not quite that far. Do you know when it was, Steven?
Yeah. You said just first team All-American quarterback? Well,
correct.
In 2006, won the Heisman, and his name is Troy Smith, and he's from Cleveland, Ohio, who we work for.
Can we restart this podcast, please? Can we please restart this podcast?
Nope. You got to sit in it.
Oh my God.
That's you just fumbled at the goal line, and now you just have to eat it. That's how it works here on Mark It Down Monday. That's how it works here on Buckeye Talk.
I don't know if he was unanimous. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. He was.
I believe he was unanimous, but he was the last first-team All-America quarterback from a major list for Ohio State. Troy Smith in 2006. But that's now coming up on 17 years since Ohio State's had a first-team All-America quarterback. And so here's the thing. All of these major lists have only one quarterback on first team. Like, they'll have 2 running backs. They'll have 2 or 3 receivers. You have a mix of different defensive positions. But the most important position, and the one that you put a special kind of athlete at, only has one on each team for these major lists. And the reason it's been a problem is that if you don't make first team All-American on a major list, you can't be in the College Football Hall of Fame. So there's some pretty great players. The one that jumps to my mind from the previous job I had was Drew Brees, not eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame, like someone that good. And Ohio State has examples too. Right now, as the rules are made, Justin Fields, Heisman Trophy finalist, CJ Stroud, 2-time Heisman Trophy finalist, would not be eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame, despite the success that they had. So that's something that people have been kind of crowing about, wanting to change, but it does help explain a little bit why Ohio State hasn't had one since then. But I guess the question I'm asking is there something, do you think this drought ends at some point soon? And what will that take, Stephen?
Yes, I do. The problem is the only way you can guarantee it is if they win the Heisman. And they're going to keep getting cracks at it, right? I think we've reached the point where the expectation is Ohio State starting quarterback is going to be in New York until one doesn't get to New York. So he'll be in consideration. But to your point, because it's only one spot and the Heisman has basically become a quarterback award, unless your name is Devontae Smith, and it's very obvious that you're the reason why your team is so good and not your quarterback, it becomes a, do you think Ohio State starting quarterback is going to win the Heisman Trophy this year conversation? And I don't know that yet. I know we have a Mark It Down Monday for that, and I don't want to spoil my decision there. But I think that every year at this point, it's probably fair to assume that they'll be in the conversation for it. And at some point, one of these quarterbacks is not just going to be a finalist. They're going to win the award, which automatically gives them at least maybe 3 of them. Because I know that there have been years where the Heisman Trophy winner wasn't the unanimous first-team All-American quarterback. Other guys have made it. But the only way you guarantee it is winning the Heisman Trophy. Or if there's just the Heisman Trophy voting is just so spread out through the 4 guys who make it that 3 of them end up on All-American lists.
So last year and the year before, C.J. Stroud was by many people considered a front runner for the Heisman Trophy going into the final weeks of the season. Justin Fields in 2019. Now, Joe Burrow was walking away with that, but he put up a Heisman Trophy caliber season. There's other years where if Justin Fields had put up the same year and taken that to New York with him, he might have been the winner of that award. So, Andrew, as someone with the greater, broader football perspective on this, does it feel like something's missing for an Ohio State quarterback to have a first team All-American, which, as Steven is saying, means essentially winning the Heisman Trophy a lot of years? Or is this just simply a matter of timing, like getting the year right where your guy is the one of the 3 or 4 that gets the win against Michigan and finishes, puts an exclamation point on the season, or just doesn't run into a Burrow-like year?
Yeah, I think it's timing. You mentioned the run into a Burrow-like year. I mean, think about the last couple of quarterbacks that Ohio State has had, like C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins. Like these are first-round quarterbacks. Like these are guys that the NFL values as, okay, this is not only one of the best quarterbacks in college football, this is one of the best players in college football. So, I think that it's pretty clearly a timing issue. Like, you mentioned a Burrow-like year. Like, there are just years where you kind of look at the numbers and we're like, oh well, nobody. I mean, you're not gonna do that. You're not gonna beat that. You just can't beat those numbers. Like, I look at this year, and this year's gonna be really hard as well. Caleb Williams exists. Like, Caleb Williams is really, really good. There are people, like, we do this every year or every couple of years, it feels like, with a quarterback who is really good. Everybody, like, kind of just says, oh, well, like, we'll just kind of wait for a year and, like, teams should start to lose in the NFL to play for this guy. And then, like, somebody will float, should he sit out? Like, Caleb Williams is that type of player. But then you've also got Drake May. Like, Drake May is really, really good too. And I remember, like, talking to people at the Combine, like other writers who cover college football nationally, and they were like, don't sleep on Drake May to be the number 1 overall pick in the 24 draft, like, which I disagree with. But that's the kind of level that we're talking about. So I don't think it's going to be this year. I think it's going to have to be in the future. It's just, you look at some of the talent that other college teams have had, that other college teams have put out, they can put out really good players too. It doesn't mean Ohio State's guys are any less good. They've been first-round picks for the last handful of years. It just means that other teams have really good players too.
I want to push back on that a little bit. I think, in contrary, that helps Ohio State this year because, well, first of all, the last 2 people to win it have been first-year starting quarterbacks, Bryce Young and then Caleb Williams. Well, Caleb Williams kind of a first-year starting quarterback. He stole the job. 1.5. But it's hard to win the Heisman 2 times in a row. You have to be significantly. There's a reason only one person has done it, because now we're judging you by that standard. So if Caleb Williams looks wonky for a week, it hurts him more than it hurts somebody who hasn't won it. The same way it was with Bryce Young. Drake May hasn't won a Heisman, but everybody's talking about him and Caleb Williams as like the second coming of great quarterbacks. Even this past draft, it was like, would you take Drake May or Caleb Williams or the current field? And a lot of people said Drake May and Caleb Williams. I think that's in favor of whoever the starting quarterback is at Ohio State, because he is kind of an unknown, and so he's working from scratch and not working against whatever his reputation is. I'll throw Quinn Ewers in that as well. He's not viewed the same way those two are from an NFL draft standpoint, but this dude was a perfectly rated recruit who was supposed to be the next generational quarterback, and those 3 names right there already come into the season with expectations. Ohio State's quarterback comes in with the expectation of being good, but there's still that, are they going to be as good as C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins until they prove it? So I think that helps. The fact that Ohio State's quarterback isn't fighting against their own reputation already.
Yeah, we've talked about that before on Buckeye Talk. The Spencer Rattler example, where you come in with just crazy expectations to start the year, where it's almost like your award to win, and then things don't go that well. And I think you're right that being the reigning winner is a bigger hurdle to try to jump. I think that doesn't happen in conference awards, but it certainly happens with the Heisman because people think of it differently. And so for Kyle McCord and Devin Brown, you guys have already listed some of the other contenders this year: Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels from LSU, Texas's Quinn Ewers, you heard of him, Clemson's Cade Klubnik, Florida State's Jordan Travis. Doug has talked when he was still around how much he likes him. Washington's Michael Penix Jr. I've talked before how I'm not sure I believe in that candidacy. a Bo Nix from Oregon. You could start throwing in people like J.J. McCarthy or Sam Hartman at Notre Dame, and you've got, if Carson Beck wins the Georgia job and they're great again, like what does he do? And the issue is in these past, since 2014, 5 of the 9 years, one person has swept all 5. Caleb Williams did it last year. Burrow did it in 2019. Mayfield did it 2017. Jackson did it 2016. Mariota did it 2014. So Heisman Trophy winners just sweeping all 5. Kenny Pickett did peel one away from Bryce Young in 2021. Trevor Lawrence peeled one away from Mac Jones in 2020. I think Doug was leading that vote with the football writers that year because he wanted, partially, they thought they needed to make sure that Lawrence was eligible for the Hall of Fame someday, because that was the way that is made up. Tua in 2018, Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama actually made more lists than Kyler Murray, who won the Heisman Trophy, and Deshaun Watson won 4 in 2015, but Baker Mayfield took 1 of them from the Sporting News. So the question isn't, I guess, whether an Ohio State quarterback, it seems unrealistic to think that one of these guys sweeps all of them. With Caleb Williams sitting out there with so many other quarterback talents, it's just whether or not you can have a good enough season combined with maybe the favorite in Caleb Williams maybe doesn't play a full season, maybe something happens, and you can peel one off. Just quickly, the odds that you guys think an Ohio State quarterback could even crack the top 3 and make one of the top 3. I mean, we're talking about Heisman finalists. Actually, forget that, because we're going to talk about Heisman finalists later. So we'll come back to that in a couple weeks. I'll mark it down Monday. But one thing I did want to ask is, when you look at this Ohio State schedule, because we've talked about how there are some challenges here. Road game at Notre Dame, very marquee game. Home game against Penn State, where Penn State could still be undefeated, and so could Ohio State. Very marquee game. Game at Wisconsin, the fickle storyline. Who knows what Wisconsin's record is at that point? Going to be a huge game, possibly in prime time from the reports that we've heard. You've always got the Michigan game. So huge games sitting out there for this quarterback. Do you think that schedule is a benefit to their candidacy, or is it a detriment because it just makes it that much harder to go through unscathed?
I think it's a benefit, number one. I think it's pretty clearly a benefit, actually, like just in terms of kind of how it's spaced. I mean, you start the season with a Big Ten opponent. So, that's going to look, we're going to see who does USC play week 0? Is it like San Jose State or something like that? Like it's some low level like you're going to see the highlights of Caleb Williams throwing 5 touchdowns that week, but you start off with a Big Ten opponent and you get a chance to say, hey, look at what I did against a Big Ten opponent compared to a G5 opponent. That's right off the bat. Then by the end of September, you're playing Notre Dame. And like you mentioned, that's a huge marquee game. That's a huge game where people are going to watch. That's a huge game where it's going to be one of the bigger early tests. It's going to be one of the bigger games early on in this season, just in terms of college football as a whole. So that's big. Then a month later, you play Ohio State and Wisconsin Penn State and Wisconsin back to back. So those are 2 games where you have to win, and those are 2 marquee games. I mean, those are going to be crazy atmospheres. Then a month after that, you play Michigan. So it's nicely spaced out to where you can kind of stay in the spotlight the entire time, if that kind of makes sense. Like if you played Notre Dame, had a bye week, then played Penn State, Wisconsin, and then played no one for 6 weeks. I mean, when you play, and with all due respect to the no ones, like when you play Michigan State, when you play Indiana, when you play Rutgers, you have to keep up a very, very high level of play to keep people kind of watching you. And I think that what this schedule does is it spaces it out well enough to where you're kind of always going to be in the spotlight. So I think it's absolutely a benefit.
I think whoever's the quarterback comes in already with the CJ Stroud case built in, where big numbers in games where everybody's watching. That for 2 years, that was CJ Stroud's case. He just fumbled it at the end when they would lose to Michigan. But it was after the Michigan State game in 21. It's like, look at those numbers, and that's supposed to be a top 10 team, and the entire world is watching with College Game Day here. That looks like your Heisman Trophy winner. CJ Stroud, even with losing Jackson Smith-Njigba this past year, the numbers were all there. He just had to go claim his award against Michigan, and he couldn't do it in that moment. But I think Ohio State's quarterbacks coming into the season are always going to have that case because of what this offense is and what their opponents are. There's going to be enough games on the schedule where the entire world's going to be watching you because they're big games. And this offense, you're going to have 4,000 yards and you're going to have 40 touchdowns. That's just how this offense works. Now, what you do with it and to add context to help you move up that ladder, that's on you. But the stage is already set for them to be positioned to be in the conversation for a first-team All-American spot. They just got to go do things to actually lock it down and not, have it, and then you play Michigan, and then you lose it. As C.J. Stroud admitted at the Combine, he said he probably left 2 Heismans on the table because he lost to Michigan.
Yeah, I think, well, as we said, it's hard to win a back-to-back, but certainly in 2021, It was there for him to win, and it slipped away. And one of the many what-ifs that Ohio State football has lingers for them in these last couple of years. Come back in segment 3. Stick around for segment 3, I should say. Don't skip segment 2. There's a lot of meat coming up in segment 2. But stick around for segment 3 because that's what we'll be marking it down, and we'll see if any of us picked an Ohio State quarterback to be a first-team All-American this year. More about the offense and the defense and who we think some of the candidates are when we come back from this break on Buckeye Talk.